Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be back and to have you back. For those of you who are rejoining us, this is the first event of the fall semester of 2021. We will be having a kind of brief, a very relatively short set of offerings this spring and this fall, in part because I am on sabbatical. But what we will have, what we're making up for in terms of quantity, we will make up in terms of quality. We have on deck today Debbie Ramirez. Debbie Ramirez is professor of law at Northeastern University School of Law, where she teaches courses in criminal justice, race, and reform. Professor Ramirez is also actively engaged with a student body in topics related to criminal law and works on strategies and initiatives to reform the criminal justice system. Professor Ramirez is the chair and founder of Northeastern Law School's Criminal Justice Task Force, which is now part of the Center for Law, Equity, and Race, also called CLEAR. CLEAR brings together academics, lawyers, judges, and allies focused on a myriad of criminal justice reform issues in an effort to harness the full strength of our re-entry networks, bail reform, and restorative justice practices, just to name a few. Professor Ramirez frequently works with academia, law enforcement, politicians, and community leaders to ensure police accountability, the focus of her talk today. She has testified numerous times before the U.S. House of Representatives and state legislatures about related issues, written about these issues for national media outlets, including the Boston Globe, and has been interviewed by ABC News, Good Morning America, and NPR, and quoted in the Washington Post and Risk and Insurance, among others. She has also published numerous articles on criminal justice in leading journals, including the American Journal of Criminal Law, Temple Political and Civil Rights Review, and Georgetown University American Criminal Law Review. Apparently, Professor Ramirez has had a few careers before even becoming a member of the faculty at Northeastern. She was an associate with the Boston law firm Hale and Dorr, and she was also an assistant U.S. attorney in Boston, where she was assigned to the Organized Crime Drug Task Force unit. In that position, she was in charge of numerous investigations and trials and handled appeals before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. Now, today, Professor Ramirez is joining us to discuss the issue of police accountability as a part of our kind of long-standing effort to better understand what kinds of reforms we should be thinking about in order to enhance public safety within communities across the nation. Welcome, Professor Ramirez. It's wonderful to have you. I look forward to seeing your presentation and having some hard-hitting questions to ask you afterwards.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's an honor to be here. And I wanted to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Sandra, and to the folks at the Kennedy School for making this presentation and this series possible. Today, I'm talking about rethinking public safety. And I wanted to begin by talking about the debate that lots of us have seen in the newspapers and elsewhere. On the one hand, there are many advocates who say we ought to defund the police, we ought to abolish the police. And this sometimes scares people. It particularly can sometimes scare communities of color, because communities of color need the police to address violent crime in their communities. On the other hand, we also want the police to be held accountable for their misconduct. And we need a mechanism to weed out the bad police so the good police can thrive. We also know that police officers engage in racial profiling and other activities that amount to over-policing. So in the communities of color, they are both under-policed because they believe the police are not sufficiently responding to the issue of violent crime, and over-policed because they are profiled, They are subject to pretext traffic stops and other confrontations which lead to police shootings and to excessive use of force. How can we address those concerns? And that is the topic for today. So the first slide talks about the problem. And the problem is that the prevailing model of policing right now is community policing. That's what the president's 21st century report told us we needed to do, that police needed to be problem solvers and working to make our communities stronger and safer. And nowhere is there more community policing than in Boston, where police have an ice cream truck and they're doing midnight basketball and other contacts with the community. That's the dominant model of policing today. And I am here to say I don't think that works anymore. Under this model, the police are the first to engage with the community in a variety of settings, whether it's homeless people on the street, quality of life issues, public urination, traffic, mental health issues, etc. Noise at parties, they're the first ones to engage. And this model of policing in which the police are responsible not just for crime, but for a myriad of other urban problems. That means that there's intense day-to-day civilian contact with armed police officers, and ultimately that results in violent responses and shootings to nonviolent situations. When we use the armed police in multiple settings where the civilians, because we have no gun control, also are potentially armed, we set ourselves up for an increase in potential and actual deadly incidents. To address this, we need to limit the number of contacts between the armed police and a potentially armed civilian population. Next slide, please. We need to rethink the whole concept of public safety, and we need to do three things. First and foremost, and most importantly, we need to create an unarmed, trained civilian public safety team to respond to nonviolent crimes. Second, we need to narrow the scope of our armed police, and they should only respond to violent crimes, ongoing crimes, and serious felonies. And third, once we narrow the scope of policing for the narrowed police force, we need to build an accountability infrastructure and architecture through professional liability insurance. Next slide, please. So the first line in this slide is really important. I really don't think the public understands what police in America are doing now. If you ask most Americans, what percentage of time do the police spend actually involved in crime? Do they know it's only 10%? And that only 5% of their time is spent on violent crime? I put that in red because I think those are really important figures, and I even put the source so that you could look at the empirical data. Because we have them doing lots of other things, like responding to graffiti, selling single cigarettes, noisy parties, welfare checks, traffic control, quality of life offenses like public urination, disorderly conduct, drug overdoses, incidents relating to mental illness. Because we have them doing all that, as well as playing basketball and driving their ice cream truck around and going to parties, they aren't spending as much time on crime or violent crime as they could. The chief of police in Dallas, after some police officers were killed for being police officers, said, "We are asking our police to do too much. We are asking them to arrest our way out of substance use disorder, arrest our way out of quality of life offenses, arrest our way out of mental illness, and be experts and social workers and EMTs, and we are asking them to do too much. And I agree. Armed police in an open and democratic society should only respond to ongoing crimes, serious felony crimes, and violent crimes. Next slide, please. Some of this has already been done in Eugene, Oregon with Cahoots, and I know you're going to have a whole presentation on Cahoots. But Cahoots is currently responding with civilian responders, unarmed, to about 5 to 8% of the police 911 calls. And this whole model is built on expanding what they're doing in Cahoots and elsewhere with civilians filling in for armed police. Next slide. We need to create a civilian police force. And this proposal, as I said, builds on Cahoots and others and expands it. And what is the proposal? It is to begin, step one, by creating a brand new strategic, intelligent, and civilian-controlled 911 system in which trained dispatchers try to discern from the person making the call whether that call needs the response of the armed police or whether that call could be done by a civilian public safety force member. Who are they? They would be professionals who are professionally trained for 6 to 18 months. They would be community trained mediators, social workers, emergency medical technicians, civilian trained traffic monitors, civilian trained quality of life monitors, looking at the streets when there are too many crowds or too many motorcycles or needles in a park or not enough lighting or bathrooms that are disgusting, so people are public urinating. Those are the quality of life monitors who go through the streets and who are looking at incidents and calling them in, and maybe problem solving with the community to make them stronger and safer. Trained civilian criminal investigators, and I would add here, though it's not on the side, trained violence prevention advocates, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, that's what the system looks like. What would be examples of how it would work? Well, suppose the Cup store in Minneapolis called 911 in a city that had this system and said, someone is passing a $20 counterfeit bill. Now, the dispatcher would say, well, that doesn't sound like you need the armed police. It sounds like you may need a trained civilian criminal investigator to come there, take statements, take photographs, preserve evidence, and issue a subpoena. But I'm not sure you need the armed police every time someone passes a $20 counterfeit bill. Unless there are external circumstances that you can describe to me requiring the armed police, I'm going to begin by sending you a trained civilian criminal investigator. Example 2. Suppose someone at Wendy's calls and says, you know what? There's a car and it's blocking our drive-through window and there's someone sleeping there. I think they're drunk. And again, the 911 person would say, we're going to send out a community trained mediator. Do you think the person is armed and dangerous? If not, then we're going to send someone out who might knock on the window. And if the person seems like they can't drive, say, I'll drive you home and I'll move the car. Again, these are the kinds of incidents that happen all the time. Another one is noise. Someone calls, oh, people having a noisy party. Do we need the armed police for that? Or could we send in a social worker or a mediator who would talk to people and say, I'm sure you don't want the armed police here. What are we going to do? Because it's midnight and the music is too loud. As opposed to a police officer who might grab someone, then they would resist, then there's resistance of arrest, and the person goes into the criminal justice system. So that would be how it would work. And the reason that I included a trained violence prevention advocate is that we also want to focus on violence prevention, which I think civilians are better at, trained professional civilians, than armed police. So things like education, training, after school programs, these people are supposed to keep our focus on this fact. Just like we aren't going to arrest our way out of homelessness, substance use disorder, or the drug problem, we're not going to arrest our way out of violent crime either. So how can we begin to use our resources to prevent it from occurring in the first place? Do we need some anger management training? Do we need some impulse control training? Do we need after-school programs? Do we need mediation skills, public speaking skills? Do we need programs in the summer for kids so that they don't resort to violence? Things like that. Now, I think that this proposal, this civilian public safety force, is asking a question that we don't always ask. Frequently, when we look at someone like George Floyd, we start thinking after the shooting, right? As opposed to prevention, detect, and deter. We react, right? Once the police explode. And we look at Derek Chauvin and we say, what is he doing, and should he be doing it, and what's excessive force, and how should he have handled it? And I want to ask a different question, which is this: should the armed police be on the scene at all? Under my system, Derek Chauvin never meets George Floyd because the dispatcher has sent out a trained civilian criminal investigator. And too frequently, as I read the jurisprudence of 1983 cases, when people sue again after an incident, I look at not that the court has looked at what did the officer do and what did the officer see and how did the officer react, right? And is it excessive, and is there qualified immunity? I'm asking a different question altogether. Should the officer have even been there? Because you know what, folks? A lot of times it's a traffic stop. And my proposal would be the armed police need not ever do traffic again. They can do it like in DC with trained civilian traffic monitors and technology. No more pretext traffic stops, no more traffic stop shootings. And noise and the other things. When you start reading the cases and asking yourself the question I'm asking, did we really need the armed police to come to the party to talk about noise to begin with? As opposed to, how did this person get shot and what did the police think? We begin to ask a different set of questions. We look at this through a different lens. What lens are we looking at it through? Through the lens of, should we rethink public safety altogether? I want to talk for a minute about the benefits of this model and what it brings that we don't have now. One, this is an easy sell to politicians. Why? Because a civilian public safety force means lots of new jobs. Patronage, which is, I know, a bad word, but it also means we could create in Boston a civilian public safety force that looked like the people of Boston. We could hire, fire, and discipline people, which we can't do with the armed police because the police unions control all that. We could create a transparent organization, and we don't have to abide by civil service. We could hire people of color, BIPOC people. We could hire disabled people. We could hire LGBTQ people. We could hire people who aspire to make Boston stronger and safer and who have that background. Second, a civilian public safety force means that all of that other policing, the 90% of it that the armed police are doing now, is now under civil jurisdiction, and we can create more easily diversity, transparency, and accountability. Third, this is really a broader way or a different way to defund, abolish, and decriminalize. So one way of decriminalizing is to restrict what the police can do. But what I'm saying, and what a lot of decriminalization people are saying, is we don't just want them once they come on the scene to be restricted in which statutes they can apply and in what ways. We don't want them on the scene at all. And with respect to defunding and abolition, yes, we still have a police force, but we've greatly narrowed their scope. Next slide. Finally, we have the problem of police accountability. Even if we were to dismantle, defund, and reimagine a narrowed police force by transferring responsibilities to other professionals such as social workers, healthcare, community services, we still need a system of accountability for a police force focused more narrowly on routine, ongoing, and violent crimes. Now, you can't solve the accountability problem if you don't understand it. So bear with me, because there are 3 things you need to understand about police accountability today. 1, there is no way to weed out the bad officers so the good ones can thrive. I sat with my police chief, Billy Evans, and he said, I can't hire the officers I want to hire because I'm subject to civil service and must hire veterans or civil service highest test takers. So I can't hire the people who have shown me through their life experience that they know how to deal with people who are poor, people who are of color, and have made their community stronger and safer. Can't hire them. I can't fire the ones who have had lawsuits against them because the union won't let me. I can't discipline anyone because the unions have said I must go through a union-controlled system in which 2/3 of the time the labor arbitrator overturns what I do. And I can't promote the ones who are doing a good job because, again, that's done through a civil service test. So we have basically ceded all managerial functions to the police union. Who controls policing in America? Not the police chiefs, the police unions. And when an officer like Derek Chauvin engages in dangerous, risky policing, they continue to remain on the force. That guy had about 19 complaints, many incidents, should have been off the force long ago. Then he exploded. And so he was sued and he was indicted. When we sue someone like Derek Chauvin, the Floyd family got $30 million. How much, who pays that? Not Derek Chauvin, not 1 penny. Police officers in this country do not pay 1 penny of police misconduct verdicts and settlements. 100%, actually 99.9%, is paid by the municipalities, by us, the taxpayers. Who pays? Minneapolis. And if you know all that, then you understand why there's no accountability. Police officers have absolutely no skin in this game. No matter what they do, even if they execute someone publicly, they will not pay 1 dime, not 1 penny. Now, once you know that, you have to think about, okay, how are we going to hold them accountable? And this idea is different than the ideas we have now. All the ideas we have are that we react after an officer like Derek Chauvin explodes. We wait until he executes someone publicly and then we sue him, we take away this, we take away that, we put him in the criminal justice system, all retroactive. What we need to do is develop a system that prevents, detects, and deters Derek Chauvin from ever meeting George Floyd. And that system is professional liability insurance. Just the way that doctors who engage in reckless medical practices can be priced out of medicine by high insurance premiums, police officers with the most dangerous histories and indicators are going to be priced out of policing by premiums that reflect the actual risk of their dangerous behavior. So this would work like driver's insurance. Your premiums go up every single time a lawsuit is settled against you. Every single time there's a verdict against you. Every single time you go into a bar, and believe me, they do, and beat someone up, and then you get convicted for assault and battery. They still stay on the force, but their premiums go up. They stay on the force because they can't be hired, fired, disciplined. You get the idea. Every time they drunk drive, every time they get a restraining order against them by any member of their family or anyone, that's a warning sign. That's a warning signal. We look at sustained complaints and other things. I don't know about you, but when I've dealt with my insurance company, they always win. Let's send in the actuaries and let's have them assess risk. And let's require every officer in America to carry professional liability insurance. Now, this slide shows how you do it. You could either have the state legislature mandate that every police officer carry professional liability insurance, or you could have every municipality. You could say, we could say to the mayor of Boston, right, whoever that's going to be, we could say, you know how every year you negotiate with the police unions? And they'd be like, yeah, yeah. And you know how every year you give them everything? Yeah, yeah. And you know how every year, one of the things that they require is that you pay all of the costs of police misconduct. Every verdict against every officer, every settlement is 100% paid by the municipality. You know how you do that? And they go, yeah, yeah. And then we also have to pay legal fees. They go, yeah, yeah, we do that. So stop doing that. And they stopped doing it in Colorado. In Colorado, they passed legislation that said in the future, we're not paying for the first $30,000 of liability. And you know what happened? The next day, the police unions in Colorado called me and they said, okay, are you working with an insurance company? Because we now want to give professional liability insurance to all of our officers to cover the $30,000 that the legislature will no longer let the municipalities pay because they need it. Are you working with an insurance company? I said, yep, Primus Insurance, here's the number. And Primus Insurance is now working with the unions to give those officers coverage. In New York, the state legislature has already filed a bill requiring all officers in New York to carry professional liability insurance. Now, I want to end with one thing, which is I've given this presentation, as Sandra has said on TV, and I always get actually quite a bit of hate mail, usually from the police unions, but sometimes police officers surprise me. And one officer said, you know, Debbie, I actually like your idea. I'm like, really? He said, we all know who these officers are. I said, really? And he said, yeah, they're traumatized because they go where you would never go and do what you would never do. He said, but what I like about your system is it's carrots and sticks. You identify them early before they explode, as opposed to just watching them, which is what we do now. And then you give them a choice. Get anger management training and your premiums go down. Get substance use disorder treatment down. It operates like driver's insurance and good drivers. Get the treatment you need. In any event, he said, they have a second chance. And you're giving them a second chance. And if they don't take it, they don't take it. But I'm with you. We need to identify them early and we need to give them treatment. And that's what your system does. All right. Thank you very much. And I'm ready to take questions.
Well, this was really wonderful. Debbie, thank you so much for a really thought-provoking presentation. I suspect that people are lining up already with lots of questions, but of course I get the first one. So
don't make it too hard, okay?
Oh, you should have asked me that before you started your presentation. So this is actually a very similar question to one that I asked Barry Friedman last fall. I think I want to start by asking you to remind me what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And I ask this for this reason. If it's about reducing violence against people of color, I can see how making changes with regards to professional liability insurance, et cetera, will make a difference, huge difference, likely. And you know, whatever your problem you're trying to solve, I think I would be definitely in favor of moving in the direction that you've just suggested. So there's that, or it's about addressing the issue of racial disparities, racial inequities in a whole host of outcomes, right? And so that might be a concern. And then the question is, are you thinking that the civilian police force and the liability insurance will make a huge difference with regards to the whole host of outcomes on which there are huge gaps between whites on the one hand, Blacks and Latinos on the other hand? I raise this issue because even if we were to replace police with an unarmed force or other kinds of services, there is no domain in American society where bias doesn't shape the outcomes of the people who are impacted by these services. So, for instance, there is no category within of actors within the criminal legal system that does not operate with some measure of bias against Blacks and Latinos. They're not armed. They are, operating often with good information, et cetera. And yet we see these disparate outcomes emerge in ways that often are at the disadvantage of Black and Latino people. We see disparities in healthcare system. We see them in education. We see them in finance. We see them in welfare. We see them in social work. We see them in employment. In each of those areas, punishment is far worse for Blacks especially, but also Latinos. So then the question becomes, what is the problem that you're trying to resolve here? Because if it is about physical brutality, what you're suggesting to me could make a huge difference. And I'm fully in support of it. If it's about racial disparities, generally speaking, I'm not sure, with the exception of physical violence, we would see huge changes at all. You would actually have to think through how to address the bias that emerges in all areas of life in order to produce better outcomes in absolute terms for these groups that are almost always made disadvantaged by the services that are offered, and to reduce the gaps in outcomes that exist. So it would be great to hear what you think.
Thank you. Great question. And first and foremost, I want to say, I don't have a plan for ending racism in this country. Okay. Wish I did, wish I had a wand, wish I could. Truthfully, I don't think we ever.
Do you have to end racism in order to address racial gaps? I mean, people could think whatever they want, but acting is a different matter.
So what's my goal here? So my first goal is to stop the shootings. I mean, it really is. I just can't watch it anymore. I don't want to see one more film like Derek Chauvin shooting George Floyd. I just don't want to see it again. I don't want to see the choking. I don't want to see I just want to stop the killing. So that's number one. And I think this plan as a whole reduces that. Now, it's not going to solve racism. Racism is going to stay in the system. But when you narrow the scope of the police force to civilians, you do affect racial disparity and mass incarceration, because the civilians who are doing traffic, for example, aren't arresting anyone. Neither is the technology. Okay, so no one's going into the system and no one's getting shot, which to me, that's a good beginning. They're not getting shot and they're not going into the system, because disproportionately those people are Black and Latinx. And so if 90% of what the police do now is done by civilians who can't arrest, they've got subpoena power, right? But they're not arresting. They have to use de-escalation, humor, mediation, and other skills to get through what they have to get through, but they're not arresting and they're not putting them in the system and they're not shooting them because they don't have guns. So I think that would affect racial disparity and mass incarceration. Now, would there still be racism within the civilian force? Yes, but instead of the police union controlling everything, we control it. So you put them on contracts, you do racial profiling data collection, you have a lot more transparency and accountability. There's so many things I don't know about the Boston police. And you know why? Because they won't tell me. So, but this civilian police force, we can say, look, you know what? We're going to be fully transparent. We're going to tell you everything. We're going to let the incident reports go up. We're going to give you all the information you want. We're going to act like we work for you. We're going to act like we're public servants. We're going to act like we are in the game to make Boston stronger and safer, not to incarcerate as many people as we can and shoot the rest. So I think that there is a different mentality, and I do believe that people who know they're going to be fired, disciplined, promoted, and hired based on how well they treat people. Are they courteous? Are they respectful? Did they try to de-escalate? And you know what else? I'd put cameras on all of them. Now, we do have cameras on the Boston police, not because they wanted them. They fought it as hard as they could. And then we start randomly looking at the camera footage of these people as part of their annual review with a focus. Were they respectful and courteous? Did they try to de-escalate? Did they follow their training? And what was the outcome? And then we highlight the tapes that are the best, and we do something about the people who are the worst. We become a much more transparent and accountable civilian force focused on public safety.
So thank you for that. It occurs to me that not included in your earlier discussion were ways that you would kind of lay out carrots and sticks so as to shape behavior. Because if we were to exclude what you just said, just by putting in place traffic monitors for civilians would not eliminate racial disparities, because you're giving traffic monitors the ability to determine who has to be held accountable for breaking whatever rules are being broken. And whenever you have created that within the context of this society, you've created spaces for racial disparities to exist. So I don't see by doing that, will you be eliminating disparities? But if you were to do what you just said, which is to put in place rules that made it so that people had to be accountable for their disparate patterns of disparities in their actions, that I think would make a huge difference. And so that to me seems like it should be a part of any civilian corps that you would create. Without that, I don't see the disparities closing at all. So it seems like a key part of your
you have in this country racial profiling data collection systems that work. We don't have it here in Boston. Why? Because the legislature won't pass it. And when we did pass it in Boston, we could not get the information on each officer, only collectively, which is not useful. So if for every person who is a public safety civilian officer, there's ways that you collect the data of the race of the people who they stop and what happens and the effectiveness of it. And we do it by officer. And part of their annual review is to look at what are the demographics of who you stopped? What are the outcomes? And do it per officer and make it public so that people can say, this particular officer did this to me. And you can look up and say, is this a pattern in practice? Or is this just a one-off incident, right? And you're not just waiting for something to happen. Presumably every month, whoever is doing your data collection system is going to tell you, here are the outliers. Here are all the officers who are doing, let's say, substance use disorder work and responding by neighborhood and by whether they're doing it day or night. So you don't want to mix apples and oranges, but we're going to look at the night people in Roxbury. And if you look at night people in Roxbury doing substance use disorder work, here's the racial demographics of everyone, and here's these people. And so you can catch outliers. And if it's systemic, you can look at the demographics of the area that they're patrolling to see whether or not it represents a true snapshot of the population that they're assigned to be part of.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on. We have a healthy list here. Felix Owusu first, and then on deck is John Stannard. And then we'll also get to the folks who have raised their hand soon after. So Felix.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. I have many questions, but I'll try and limit myself to one to make sure everybody has a chance to ask. I think one thing that really stuck out to me is sort of expectations about how, I think Sandra touched on this a little bit, how different things things would be if you just brought new people in. And I've been trying to think about the balance between like what legally needs to change about sort of what our rules are as a society about what we're allowed to do and what the people in power are allowed to sort of request in terms of sanctions, versus just who is in charge of, executing with the power that exists right now. You mentioned, I think, a lot of the challenges about removing, for example, or disciplining police. I worked in a police department as a civilian, and I was also in a union and within a police department. Our union did not have the same power as the police union.
No union in America has the power that our police unions do.
Right. And I think I'm a person who's been a union organizer, and I think there's it's worth reflecting on why that is so different, right? It's not that the police union is like better organized or something. I think where the demand for this kind of work comes from, I think there's something real in the community in terms of like.
The reason the police unions are more powerful than any other union in this country, it's not a matter of money, it's not a matter of organization, it's a matter of racism. It's a matter of politicians want those blue people lined up behind them to say, I will protect you from them. And that has been the message for years, right? And no politician, you know what their power is? Branding. No politician wants to be branded soft on crime. No one. Now it's changing a little, but in the past, the reason they have the power that they do is if I run for mayor, I need the police union. I don't need the teachers union. I don't need the others because money's fungible and I could get it from other states and stuff. But I need those police to stand behind me to tell people I'm tough on crime. Because if I'm soft on crime, I'm not getting elected. And there's an underlying racial tone to it of you keep me safe from them.
And so I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at in terms of, I think that is what actually would need to change. And I think that speaks to a real demand and also sort of like a sort of set of desires within the community to have control over other communities or, people within your community. And I'm just trying to, speak to, what is going to dislodge that within this. If that still persists, it's going to be sort of different people who are standing behind them. It's, a person with a taser instead of a gun or what have you, but there's like, I still want to be able to call somebody when I see a homeless person in my neighborhood and want them to leave. Like that demand is still there. And I'm really trying to sort of get at why having different people, but the same sort of rules and guidelines, like it's still illegal or we still have, laws against all these things. Like if those things don't change, like what is going to stop this from sort of developing a lot of the same characteristics that we don't like about policing, given that they're facing the same pressures in the broader system?
Because right now the police control who's hired, and it's not, we can hire the people we want to hire, not the people who are the highest test takers and not the people who have veterans preference.
And where would that come from? Like what about this new setting would change that, right? Like, they aren't police officers and there's no structure here. We build the structure, right? We can say now we have a new structure, right? And it's not. We're not allowed to unionize, for example, like the civilian force would not.
I don't mind them unionizing. I don't mind that at all. I don't want the police union in charge because police unions are different from other unions. They can unionize, but they're contract people. They don't have the power of police. I don't think anyone wants the civilian public safety people to endorse them in the same way with police because these are different people with a different function. I don't think you're going to just replicate the Boston Police Department. I really don't. Not if you do it right, not if you hire right. When I was talking to Billy Evans a long time ago, he said, the best way to stop the shootings, he said, don't hire them in the first place. And he said, I know who to hire, but I can't hire them. That's like just the first thing. And then he said, the next thing, fire the ones who start using excessive use of force and then discipline the ones who can't. All of the things that are there for the police, like the fact that you have to go through a special labor negotiation process, the chief can't just hire you or fire you, is all from the police union negotiating with the municipality. And this doesn't have that power. And you can set up a structure that says, In fact, any municipality could say this right now, but they won't to the police union because they have the guns and they're doing violent crime and people want them on the streets. But you could say, look, you know, you have the power to unionize around these issues and not those. The state legislature could say to the police unions, even, they could say, you know what? You may no longer, as a matter of public safety, you may no longer negotiate with the municipality about the cost of police misconduct. You may no longer negotiate with the police unions about the cost of the legal costs of police misconduct. Police misconduct is a public safety matter and municipalities shouldn't be picking up the tab. But they could also say, look, here's this other union, and they can negotiate about healthcare. They can negotiate about wages. They can negotiate about a lot of the things that the other unions have, right? But not about issues of public safety, right? Including if they get sued for misconduct. And, you know, we can say, we're going to set up a system for how to adjudicate discipline. The unions, a lot of unions cannot negotiate discipline. Some of them can, some of them can't. But we could set up a system saying, in this case, discipline is a matter of public safety, and we're not going to put the people in this public safety thing in charge of their own discipline. That's what we've done with the police. Who's policing the police? The police. Who's in charge of police discipline? The police. We can set up a different system.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's try to get some other folks in here. So I want to go, well, first, Debbie, John Stannard asked for you to provide links to at least one of the past or pending pieces of legislation calling for the maintenance of professional liability insurance. I think, you know, folks are interested in diving deeper into this issue.
Sandra, can I also say something as well?
Sure.
Thanks. My camera's all messed up. I'm traveling right now, but I'm really glad that I did sit in on this. I do federal advocacy on criminal justice and have been doing it for almost a decade. I work for the Church of Scientology's National Affairs Office in DC. And most recently, going back several years, is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And it's passed. I'm assuming you guys have followed this pretty closely, but all the things you're talking about became really apparent when the negotiations between Senator Booker and Senator Scott collapsed a few weeks ago, and that bill's basically off the table.
Yep.
And one of the issues that I've been really interested in is this issue of accountability, because the main thing that torpedoed that bill was the controversy around the qualified immunity. You know, have it, don't have it. You know, that's kind of the way the House version of the JPA was, get rid of all qualified immunity. And the strongest opponents were the police union sending in the letters, but also you can't ignore the prosecutorial associations, United States attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys associations, and their advocacy kind of trumped everything. And there are so many. I'm on a number of national advocacy groups. There are so many people behind that. I was kind of surprised when it just collapsed into nothingness. But here's my question for you, and you can maybe point me to some further resources. Some of the advocates that I'm working with are into this as a zero-sum game. Either we get everything or we get nothing. Some of the advocates, and I'm kind of working with some of these folks, are looking at how can we get is there an approach where multiple bites at the apple can be taken to move us from where we are now to a better place? And that is around accountability. Qualified immunity is just, you know, a type of accountability, or not, as it's applied. There were 2 Supreme Court decisions in the last week that further solidified the absolute failure of qualified immunity to be able to rein in, police action that's, that's not appropriate. So you mentioned Colorado, and I believe New York had legislation related to the liability insurance. Anything you could point me to where I can get a little bit more data on the.
Okay, I will send a link to this.
Yeah, put it in the chat if you could, or
and it is, if someone could put it in the chat for me, it's the Rutgers University Law Review, volume 73, page 307, winter 2021. It looks like this. It's called Policing the Police, a roadmap to police accountability by Deborah Ramirez and Tamar Pinto. It just came out, as I said, in Rutgers University Law Review. Again, it's volume 73. Page 307, winter 2021.
awesome. I can find that. Thank you.
And that has the Colorado bill, it has the New York bill, it has other things.
Right.
I also just wanted to address qualified immunity in two ways. One of those two cases of qualified immunity was, again, they're responding to a noise at the party, right? That's how one of them began.
Yep.
Now, no one talks about why do we need armed police responding to noise at a party, right?
Exactly.
Again, I'm asking a whole different question, not is what they did appropriate, inappropriate? Is there a factually similar precedent that would have shown them qualified immunity? For those of you who don't know what qualified immunity is, it's a big shield for the police. And it's stupid anyway. You know, when my husband Ralph was alive, I said to him, do you realize the police pay nothing? He goes, oh, that can't be because I do those trials and I've given officers a verdict of $100 million, not $100,000, $1 million. He goes, they have to pay that. I go, oh no, Ralph. Legally, they have to pay it. But then the unions negotiate with the municipality, in every state in this country, and they say, you must pay the verdict that Ralph Gantz and the jury put in for 100,000 or $1 million or 30 million. And the police officer pays not 1 cent. And he said to me, then why do we even have qualified immunity? The whole reason was that we thought the police were actually paying this. And if they're actually paying out of their little pockets, then we have to make sure they knew it was wrong. And they can only know it's wrong if there's a factually similar precedent. And if there isn't, then they have qualified immunity. He goes, but what's the whole point of the doctrine? If in the end, whether they're even if they don't get qualified immunity, if they do, they don't pay anything. And if they don't pay anything because they pay not 1 cent. It's empirical. Again, all the studies are in this law review article.
I appreciate that. And that just as a further point on that, that qualified immunity you're talking about is not a legislative artifact. That's judicially created.
Yes,
that's created by the courts.
Not in the legislation. And so we could create another thing that goes in that says, and the person has to actually pay it. We could put that into 42 USC 1983. Or the municipality could say, guess what? We need this money for our schools, our school children, to get computers, to get through a pandemic. And we're not paying you, the police, for your misconduct. You're going to have to pay for your misdeeds with your professional liability insurance.
Great. Well, thanks,
Okay.
Deborah. I'll let everybody move on to others.
Yes, thank you, John. And we do want to get in as many people as possible to ask their questions. And so if we could keep the questions short, and also Debbie, if we could just kind of a little bit, that would be really very helpful.
I'll try to move faster. I'm old. I move slow.
Well, remember your younger self. So Jerry Hines, if you could ask your question, and then we'll have Danielle and Martin ask theirs.
Okay, I wondered, Debbie, how about if this professional liability insurance is going to be negotiated and the police officers aren't going to pay for it, how is that going to be an accountability tool if it's part of the compensation package? They're still not on the hook for anything. How is that going to work?
Well, in Colorado, for example, the police officers in the system that we talk about in this article, the police officers pay like a standard fee for the insurance. And then if their conduct is terrible, the deductible goes up. And if it's good, the deductible goes down. So we have actually an economic model that we run with the New York police. So the police are on the hook for there's a deductible, like on your car insurance, right? There's a deductible. And then your premiums go up if you engage in risky behavior, and it goes down if you don't. The victims are compensated through the professional liability insurance, just like in medicine or in car, but they do have to pay a deductible. They do have skin in the game, because when their premium goes up above the average, they have to pay the difference between the average and the increase caused by their conduct. The average is paid by the police department, the base.
I just don't see how that's going to change behavior, but you know, I get it. Yeah, I'll move on.
Thank you so much, Jerry. So Danielle, Martin, and then Sue. So Danielle, you're up.
I thank you, Professor Ramirez and Sandra Smith, and to Harvard for hosting this. I have participated in several of these, and it's been really helpful. So I'm a social worker from Indiana. And so my question relates really to the ideas of civilians responding to multiple situations. And I definitely think that is a move in the right direction. But I also want to just sort of introduce a little bit of critique as well to a national trend that I'm seeing happening as a social worker. We just actually today concluded the last day of the first National Police Social Work Conference in Bloomington, Indiana. And it has met a variety of different opinions. We have social workers who are absolutely opposed to being integrated directly into police departments. And then we have the other camp that says that we're more effective and, you know, if we can be integrated. I noticed a comment about somebody's concern for social worker safety going out in the community. And I can say, as a community social worker, I've been out there without law enforcement. A lot of my peers have been, and as long as actually police presence makes us more unsafe.
Right.
So many times I'm like, oh, please don't, please don't. You know, and there is that association of social work with police, and that's for good reason. There's actually historical connection between social work and policing, and it is a part of social work history that I think many of us are concerned about. We're pushing for more anti-oppressive social work practices. So we don't want to be used to surveil in communities. We don't want to soften the blow from what could be coming with the police. We don't want to put a veneer of respectability on policing. Many of us don't. And so I guess my kind of where I'm coming from is hoping that as we move forward and propose civilian involvement, that we also consider how civilians can replicate a lot of the harm, and how do we keep that separation. I love Denver Star, I love Cahoots, you know, we're really studying a lot of these different models in my town, but our police department wants to keep control, wants to keep the police or the social workers working within the police department, and that really concerns me. So I'm glad that you're seeing separateness, and that you're also advocating for vulnerable or marginalized community members to be parts of the civilian piece of it. So anyway, just it's a thank you, and also just I hope that everybody critically thinks about how to integrate social work so that we don't harm. That's all, really. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing. I work with a lot of different police, and one police officer in Lawrence, his daughter is an EMT, and he said, I saw the difference when there was a shooting and we both responded, his daughter and him. He said, and I grabbed the guy and I was saying, tell me who shot you. Was this the Red Star gang or whatever? And I'm interrogating him. And she grabbed me and said, Dad, stop it. This man has been shot. It's our call. It's EMT call. You stand down. And he said, oh my God, you know, he's like, I'm a good cop, but I'm in a different state of mind. And he said, I realized, and he actually likes this model. He likes a separate civilian EMT, not embedded within the police, because he said, I needed to hear that. I needed her to say, hey, this is not the time to interrogate him.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go with Martin and then Sue Mallon.
Am I Martin? I am Martin. Am
You
I
are Martin.
You
Well, that's what, yeah.
Only my mother called me Martin, and everyone else calls me Marty, but I think Zoom calls me Martin. So hi, Deborah, and hi to some other people I know here. I have two questions, actually, if I can try to shoot in two questions. The first one is, I was on the recent committee in Brookline called the Reform Committee, which was considered the right-wing committee because we were willing to say Brookline police need improvements, but they're not terrible. And some people thought that was an enabling apologist committee. But anyway, the point is that I did look at some of the literature on qualified immunity last year, and I've wondered out loud to other people, and I'll wonder out loud here to one of my questions, which is, what is the evidence that qualified immunity really affects individual officers in terms of motivating them to do bad stuff? Or I guess I'm not sure how to phrase the other side of that, that they feel immune to punishment. My sentiment has been, my inkling has been that internal discipline is more important, and the kind of accountability that Deborah was talking about in general, but that's not something on their mind when they're out in the street in a split-second decision is, well, I've got qualified immunity, I may as well go ahead and do this. So that's one question. Should I wait? Hold off for this. I'll hold off for the second one.
Okay, I was actually interviewed recently about a police force. I forget which one it was. Like maybe it's north of the city, who was advertising that basically you should know that you're indemnified against any misconduct, and they were trying to recruit police officers that way because they were afraid police officers would feel like, gosh, if I do something wrong, I'm going to get sued. And they were basically, they didn't use the word qualified immunity, but they were just saying, you should know you're indemnified, you're 100% indemnified against any cost to you for anything that happens on the job. So I agree that it's not the only thing, but they do know, all police officers know. That's why they fight the qualified immunity, because they you know, they want to win both ways. They do know that they're never going to pay 1 cent. And to the point that Jerry Hines was made, once in Colorado, you flip the table and you say you're liable for the first 30,000. 30,000 is a lot of money to a cop. I would have put it at 100,000, but whatever. And once they know now they are going to be on the hook for the first 30,000, 100,000, they now have skin in the game. And they have skin in the game because now they need the insurance, and the insurance is going to price them out if they're reckless. And the insurance also has a deductible.
Okay. Well,
Marty, if you could promise to make this question quick, and Debbie can promise to make the response quick, we can move on to the three who are on.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So indemnity is a bigger, more complicated issue, but the second question was, I just downloaded your article, but I looked for the answer quickly and didn't find it yet on professional liability insurance. Do you have any sense of the cost of that? And also, would it be cost effective for a community that doesn't have insurance in general? Like Brookline is self-insured and has about 130 cops and only about 3 to 6 complaints for civilian complaints a year that are generally pretty minor. But so the cost issue is what I'm wondering about.
Okay, on page 332 and 333 of the article, there's a whole table on the cost, average claim size, base premium, profit margin, loss ratio, number of officers, number of settlements, etc.
Now, actually, can I interrupt? Because what I'm looking at is trying to see who the publisher is. I'm seeing it on the Northeastern website with different page.
Well, there's only one chart in the article, and that chart is sort of like, and it's in the section of the paper that's called the department model.
Okay, because this is different.
Yeah, why don't we promise to send this out so everyone has access to it? That way we can move on.
Great. Okay, thank you very much then. Goodbye.
Thank you, Marty. So Morgan, Benson, then Kathy, and then Ariana, if we have time, and hopefully we will. Morgan, please ask your question. Good to hear from you. or perhaps not. Kathy, how about you jump in and get right in there and ask your question or very brief set of questions. Kathy.
Okay, so one of my concerns is I think police have their issues, but also we have different mandates for different communities. So for example, in a white middle class, upper middle class community, I've heard a police officer say, we don't want to get these kids in trouble and ruin their futures. So we want to arrest them, we'll give them community service. And that's sort of like baked in. And then in more, in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, the police that's not their mandate. That's not their pressure from outside, for example. And even internally, but also even from outside. So how do we, I think it's a little bit Sandra's question is, how do we deal with the fact that, well, I'll give one example. They've shown that people, when a Black kid commits a crime, think they're evil, and a white kid commits a crime, they're traumatized. Must come from trauma. So how do we sort of unbake the racism that how do we unbake those two racism things? Fix it or unbake it. I'm not saying you fix it all, but
I think there's a lot of discretion in policing, and that discretion tends to be racially biased. But by limiting the number of contacts and having some rules like Rachel Rollins instituted about what we're going to do and who we're going to prosecute and for what would help. So if we had a civilian force, we might say that we're not going to send an armed police officer for shoplifting under 50. And that's in every community. Instead, we're going to send a civilian investigator whose mandate is to try to figure out how, maybe through restorative justice, to resolve this without putting someone into the system. Again, you have a lot more control over a civilian public safety force than you do over police and prosecutors.
great. Thank you so much.
Okay, so there's a terrific set of questions from Ariana Jean Johnson. Ariana, would you like to ask your questions? Okay, so let me ask the questions for Ariana. So do you have a concern that your model could create a civilian police force largely made up of marginalized folks without the power, legal protections, pension benefits, and pay as sworn officers currently receive? That's the first question. Second question, you mentioned the goal is to ensure an armed officer doesn't meet the person they could harm. But what are your thoughts around when the armed officer does indeed need to come into contact with a citizen? Does your model address training or other avenues for addressing officers who are actively working and using excessive force and are not weeded out?
With respect to benefits, I want them to have benefits. They can negotiate about benefits. I'm not saying the benefits should be different in terms of pension, pay, etc. But they are doing different work and less dangerous work, so it might not be completely the same, but they need to negotiate about that. With respect to how we deal with excessive use of force for the armed police, that's by pricing them out of policing before they ever get to their victim through professional liability insurance.
Look at you, Debbie. You're getting through these answers to these questions so quickly. Okay, so good. Heather Campbell, you are up. You have a set of questions.
Oh, thanks very much, Sandra, and appreciate the conversation, Professor Ramirez. I'm a commissioner with the Calgary Police Commission in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So I was actually quite fascinated by your comment that the Boston Police have a ice cream truck to give children ice cream, because here in Calgary we tend to arrest 12-year-olds for stealing ice cream. So we're working through some things. Not even kidding.
It could be worse.
Not even kidding. So I wanted to understand if your research and your plan, particularly the professional liability insurance, if you have done any work to see if that could extend into international police services like in Canada and the UK, where we have a fairly similar legislative structure, regulatory framework, and union organization with substantial strength that influences police accountability so substantially.
Yeah, the insurance companies love this idea. And they think it's a real moneymaker. And if you can entice them into the market and give them the numbers, which the numbers are in this, they can actually earn a lot of money doing this. And there are insurance companies in every country. So there's no reason that you can't send in the actuaries and deal with the numbers. The question, though, to get the unions to the table, you have to have some legislative body or municipal body who's going to say that they are going to have to pay some amount of the police misconduct damages and settlements.
Thank you. So it's really about driving, in our case, the changes to the Police Act and the changes to the police regulation from the Minister of Justice and the Solicitor General that will entrench that opportunity to use that approach. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left, in good part because Debbie started to answer those questions very quickly. I'm going to give a second for other people to jump in. But in the meantime, maybe I'll take up the rest of this time. So how are you imagining the police will respond in the context where a civilian force would come into play and take over a huge percentage of the responsibilities that they're now tasked with? I'm sure that there's some subset that they would love to have to give up, but I'm also sure that they would not want to give up as much as you seem to want to take away from them. And then another question, this is what I imagine that Frank Hartman would ask: is it wise to take away almost all the responsibilities for police except those related to violence? Do we, I might be remembering this correctly, but I'm pretty sure that Frank has suggested it would be a bad idea to only leave violence or use of force activities in the hands of police and then farm out other activities that are nonviolent and, you know, maybe far more kind of civil in orientation. So how would you respond to those kinds of concerns?
You look at police training, even after 30 years, most of their training is on force and use of force. That's part of the University of Pennsylvania Law Review article by Barry Friedman. That's what they're trained to do. That's what they're hired to do. That's what they want to do. Do they want to be social workers? If they did, they would have joined social work. Do they want to be EMTs? They would have done that. I think a lot of police resent the community policing model, but it doesn't matter because guess what? They work for us. And we get to design in an open democratic society what role we want to assign to armed police. And in this sense, I think there are a lot of reasons why in a democracy you want to limit the role of police. I'm kind of a libertarian on this issue. I want them to have the smallest role possible that leaves us safe. And so I do not think they need an ice cream truck. I do not think they need to be playing basketball. I do not think they need to be doing the public urination stuff. I do not think they need to go to every party where there's noise. I would look seriously at Rachel Rollins's list of offenses that her office has said she will no longer prosecute because she is one of the social justice workers who are leading the way. The problem, and the reason Tom Cotton got as much press as he did, is because then you have to answer, okay, what are we going to do about those things? We're just going to let people shoplift? No. First of all, in my town, Lexington, if you shoplift, you are not going to prison. You are not going to jail. You are not going to delinquents. They're going to call your parents. They're going to call your parents if you're selling drugs in the school. They're going to call your parents if you kick the principal in the shins. Nobody in Lexington is going into prison, jail, or the juvenile system. And you know what? the town hasn't fallen apart. So there is this disparity to begin with, but to the extent you're going to cede from prosecutors that criminalization of everything, then someone else has to take over. And I want that to be a trained civilian public safety corps. And my idea of a democracy is police who are not elected and who are using fatal force ought to be restricted immensely, as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramirez. This is wonderful talk and conversation afterwards. Really appreciate all the thought-provoking ideas that you've shared. And I'm pretty sure that folks are happy with appreciate the resources that you've shared as well, so that they can look into this more deeply than they've been able to today. We will keep track of your work and hope to hear from you soon with regards to all that develops in this context. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.